Welcome to the Unintentional Mentor Podcast. I am your host, Michael Doherty. Welcome to all of you that are listening for the first time, and for those that have been playing along the entire time, welcome to episode 5 with this week's mentor, Izolda Trakhtenberg. Had the very good pleasure of knowing Izolda for almost 20 years now. Very, very lucky and fortunate. You could tell I call her sis. She calls me little bro. And we go all over on a nice journey of the mentors that shaped Izolda's life. And some stories that I've known her for years, I'm hearing for the very, very first time. She also catches me flat-footed and gets me speechless, which is very, very, very hard to do and happens rarely. But I do want to also, for those of you watching at home and also those listening, draw your attention to 3 things and apologize. This was recorded while I was away in Houston visiting Jen's brother, Jen being my girlfriend. The room I was in was very large and echoey, so you'll hear an echo. You'll also notice the decor is different. And last but not least, I am looking above the camera when I hit record on Zoom. Apparently it switched from the camera that I record on to the one on my laptop, and I had no clue until after this was recorded. But the conversation was so good, I really don't think it matters. I hope you enjoy this week's conversation with Izolda. I really, really, really look forward to sharing this one with you since I recorded it. And now, this week's mentor, Izolda Trakhtenberg. Hi, Izolda.
Hi, Mike.
How are you?
I am fabulous. Thank you for asking. I'm underslept, but fabulous.
I completely understand the feeling. Completely. So the reason I wanted to bring you on is because you are absolutely, without a doubt, one of the most creative people I know. And I know by proxy, you have been the unintentional mentor of several individuals through your musical pursuits and your authoring of various types of books and tarot card reading. And like you're a tour de force of creativity. So
Wow.
when it came to the short list of people I wanted to talk to, you were at the very, very tippy top.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you.
Um,
Yikes.
so as somebody's unintentional mentor, and you've been a mentor to me a time or two, who has inspired you to become Izolda? And that is absolutely your real name. This is not me just making anything up. But who has inspired Izolda to become the tour de force that she is?
Oh, wow. First of all, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Second of all, I have a friend whose mother for about 12 years, thought my name was Lisa. And that Izolda was just a name I took on for the Renaissance Festival where I worked. So you are not the first to go, is that your real name? No, it's my real name. But
I know it's your real name.
People have thought that Izolda is a name I took on like a character or something. No, that's my actual name. To answer your question, that's a huge question. I have many inspirations, some of whom I've met, some of whom I haven't met. I will say first and foremost, you're one. No, you are, because here's what you did. You saw back when you were creating Redemption, writing it, putting it together, making it. You saw something that you wanted to do that you were really excited about, and you just went and did it. And I think that is, it inspired me to do some of the things I went and did, because a lot of people I think stop. They go, I want to do this, but there's really no way I could do it. And you didn't do that. You went, I want to do this, and I'm going to figure out how. And that was amazing. And then you went further and you made more, and then you reached out to other people and you created a movement. And I think someone who is really passionate like that, that's inspiring. And as I said, it inspired me to do certain things too. And as I said, there are lots of people. My 6th grade English teacher inspired me. She inspired in me a love of reading that I did not have before. Her name was Miss Hudson at the time. Now it's Mrs. Gutman, and we're still in touch on Facebook, which is really cool. And I dedicate every book I write to her, because before her, I hated to read. English made no sense to me because it's actually my 4th language. And it's not the first language I learned to read, but it made no sense when I was trying to learn to read it. So I didn't do it. I didn't read. I hated to read. When we had to stand up and do book reports, I would read the back cover of a book and make up a story around that and just say something because I despised, I loathed reading because English made no sense. And Miss Hudson recommended to me two books one day. She said, "Here's what you're going to do. You're going to read Down a Dark Hall by Lois Duncan, and you're going to read a Zilpha Keatley Snyder book, which was The Egypt Game." And she said, "Just read those. I think you'll like them." And I went, "Okay." And I took them home and I plowed through them in one night and came back the next day and I said, "You were right." And she said, "Here are two more." And so for the next 8 months, every night I would read two books that she would recommend out of the library, and then I'd return them. And it inspired in me a love of storytelling and a love of reading and a love of writing, even though I didn't do it. I love good writing. And so she was a huge inspiration. All the musicians that I've ever heard have inspired me. All of the people who strive when I worked at NASA, the astronauts, my friend Pierce Sellers, who was a scientist who ended up being an astronaut, went up onto the space station. Anyone who strives is a source of inspiration for me and is a source of uh, wonder. And that's the best way I can say it.
That's amazing. You've just covered like three very different things
I know.
simultaneously, and I love it. Um,
You asked.
I did happily. So let's touch on the NASA thing, because I one of the things I love about you is that you are the voice for a lot of NASA projects.
Some,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so uh, when your friend, the now astronaut, what inspired you from that astronaut?
Well, first of all, he has passed away. He
I'm
was
sorry to hear.
amazing. Yeah, yeah, he was amazing. He ended up being, uh, yeah, Pierce was a wonderful man. And what inspired me about him is that he's another one of those people who he became an astronaut a little bit later in life. He had been a scientist and then again decided, I hate the word pivot because it's just so overused, but he
Yeah,
decided to make a change. And the change was, doggone it, I used to want to be an astronaut, and doggone it, I'm going to go be an astronaut. And he did what it took to make that happen. And that's one of the things that I've been really sort of stressing in my own life and stressing to the clients I work with and the companies I work with is I ask the question, what did you want to be when you were a kid? And those answers often are the seeds for what they kind of need to be doing now. And
hmm
that's what Piers inspired in me. He kind of made me think about that. Yeah, what did I want to be when I was a kid? And am I doing it? And asking those questions opens up a world of possibilities. It also opens up some serious sort of get down to it minutes where you have to really sit with yourself and go, am I doing what I wanted to do? And yeah, I could never be an astronaut. I have terrible eyes, for example, but I wanted to be an astronaut, and no, I didn't get to be an astronaut, but doggone it, I worked at NASA for many years. So there are things you can do that approximate
right.
what you want it to be. And so in how he lived his life, and he was also charm itself, I have to say, but in how he lived his life, I got the inspiration to start thinking about those questions and what those answers need to be for me. And they don't have to be all one answer. That's something I've really realized. They don't have to be all one answer. You don't have to go, well, I wanted to be an astronaut and doggone it, that's the only thing I can strive for. There are lots of ways to be uh, adjacent to astronaut, for example. You don't have to necessarily go up, although it's one of my goals. It's a bucket list item to get out of the Earth's gravity. I really want to get out of the atmosphere. I think that would be cool. So he inspired me, but he also made me realize that I had to be honest with myself about how I was approaching the goals that I had and the ones that I was pursuing and the ones that I hadn't pursued.
Um, yeah, as you're talking, I am just like, yes, yes, I am just absolutely. So one of the inspirations for this podcast was a gentleman by the name of John Hayden, who was a friend of mine for a very long time in the nonprofit world,
Mm.
and was a mentor of mine because, an unintentional mentor, because we were friends, and like I never got a chance to tell him, we literally scheduled we're going to schedule a time to go, visit with each other, or me to visit him before he passed, and then he passed.
Mm,
So this, to me, these conversations are really about highlighting what people like Pierce and John and other people like that do for our lives.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, looking at that very question of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's a very, very, I think it's one we take for granted as we get older.
For sure.
Um, so it's nice to have a look back on those key moments, because it might give you a chance to, I think Neil Gaiman, it was Neil Gaiman, he talks about going up the mountain and how the different ways that you can get to the top of the mountain. And you're absolutely right. Like, just being an astronaut is not the only way to be an astronaut.
Yeah, for sure. Look at you with making a movie about outer space. I don't know if being no, but seriously, I don't know if being an astronaut was a goal for you when you were a kid, but
Right.
you and here's another way you inspired me.
Oh,
You no, seriously, this is so important. I watched this kind of from the sidelines because I only helped a little bit with sort of editing the movie, the screenplay. I
mhm.
didn't really do much else with it, but I watched so many people get so excited because you tapped into something that they wanted, that they loved, and it helped many people get into that space of I can do it too. Whatever the it is, I can do it too. And there's something so profound about that realization.
Yeah. It's I am you, uh, uh, speech. You've known me a long time. Speechless, I am not. Um, no, it's I personally, and this is why people are unintentional mentors. Like, I was focused on the project and I didn't really think about the long-term impacts. Like, retrospectively, there are families with children that exist now because of that movie. And there are people who are working in their own creative stuff and inspired by stuff because of that.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't see myself as that mentor, unintentional mentor, but I get it. But like, when you've made the connection to me that I hadn't thought about, from your English teacher to Pierce to all the different people that connects the dots of inspiration and excitement.
For
Um,
sure.
that is exactly why, like, I want to talk to people about their unintentional mentors, because there's somebody that's going to hear something that you said on this podcast and then be inspired to go do something else. Um,
Hopefully. That'd be cool.
oh, absolutely. I I almost want to put money on it, but I don't want to put money on it. Um, so one of the things that you are fascinating to me in the best and most delightful way is your unbridled source of creativity when it comes to music. So we talked about your English teacher inspiring you for writing, but
Hmm.
who lit the passions of music?
Oh boy. So, how much time do you have exactly?
Tons.
Okay,
This is a
cool.
show about you, so let's talk about it.
All right. So there I have many inspirations. First, of course, is my mother, who is a singer, and she sang songs to me from I was pre-verbal, and apparently I la la la'd harmony parts before I could actually speak words. I don't know this for a fact. This is what she says.
Right.
But I started singing with her. I come from I was born in the former Soviet Union, and where we come from, there's a sort of a singing culture. So we would, at parties and things like that, my mother was always asked to sing, and I would always join her and sing harmonies to the folk songs that she was singing. So singing in harmony, singing together, singing a cappella was really important to me. I started playing violin when I was 5, and I have a love-hate relationship with the violin. I will say
Okay.
that because, well, I was made to play classical music, and I love classical music, but I am not a classical musician. I'm a traditional musician or original music, but I'm not a classical musician. I tend to want to play with what's there rather than play only what's there. And that's a big difference. You know, improvisers are very different than classical musicians. Nothing against classical musicians. As I said, I respect it. I love it. It's just not who I am. So I quit the violin I played from the time I was 5 to the time I was 14. And I quit at 14 and went full force into musical theater and loved it. And then started the violin back up again at 22 and realized, oh, I could no longer play classical music at all. You lose it, you know? If you don't
Yeah.
play for a long time, you lose it. I started playing traditional music, Irish music, Scottish music, traditional American music, and jazz, improv, that kind of thing, and loved it. Had a great time with it. The singing, as far as who inspired that further, was one amazing. Thank goodness for teachers. They just make miracles every day. Mary Alice Powell, we called her MAP because those were her initials. She was my high school choir director. And she, first of all, if you've ever learned from me, if you're listening to this podcast and you've ever learned anything from me, you can thank MAP because she taught me how to teach. I learned how to teach by watching and observing what she did, and she was incredible. She was an incredible, inspiring educator. And she was willing to take a chance on me, which meant that she, in ninth grade choir, gave me a solo and was tough on me, but also the way she taught music, the way she thought about music, it was they were stories. The whatever song you were singing, whatever piece you were singing, you were always telling a story, and there was something so wonderful, and I mean wonder hyphen full, wonderful about the notion that every time you pick up a piece of music to sing it, that there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. There is going to be conflict. There is going to be resolution, and it's going to be exciting. And with harmony, that means you're telling multiple perspectives of the story. And with her as my teacher, I learned so much about how I want to sing. I learned how to teach other singers. So that's one of the things I do is I teach singers to sing and how to find their best voice and bring it out. And she also had this gift of making you feel like you could do it. She didn't try to make you feel that way. She was kind of a hard ass, but
Hmm.
she made you feel like just because she made you feel like you could do it. And I did. And I ended up singing my class song at high school commencement, and I was the lead in several of the musicals with such people as Jeffrey Seller and Andrew Lippa. If you don't know who they are, look up Broadway. You might. Jeffrey Seller is the producer of such little musicals like Rent and Hamilton, just so you know.
Nobody's heard
And
of those.
no, nobody know. And
They're terrible.
In the Heights and Avenue Q, and just a few.
Hmm.
And Andrew, obviously Jeffrey's won a lot of Tonys, and Andrew, among many other things, wrote the words and music to The Addams Family, the musical. So these were my cohorts in high school musical theater. And I shared the stage with today's luminaries, which, little old me, but it was amazing. We had the best time creating shows with, a $75 budget, that kind of thing. So sometimes literally very little
Yeah.
budget, but you did, and that brings its own kind of ingenuity. And that's what MAP did, is she allowed us to reach for our ingenuity with both hands and see what we could come up with. And she let us really explore. And that's something, talk about inspiration. If somebody trusts you to explore and to make things happen, wow, it's never ending once that thing sparks.
I could not agree more. And it is infectious, and it is.
Sure.
I mean, think about this. Like we are now talking about people. Pierce is a little bit more current for you, but we're talking about people that inspired your life, all the way back to elementary school.
Sure.
Um, it's amazing, and it just makes me take a step back and constantly review um, the people that made those impacts on mine, the people that um, you don't even think about from time to time that have made a huge difference. And it's
Sure.
interesting because you've talked about, like, your friends going on to be luminaries, and to me you are an equal luminary in
Oh,
my
wow.
eyes as those people. Well, yes, I do have every single one of those on their soundtracks on my phone. Um, but can we talk about, the Renfest and tarot reading and all of that other fun stuff?
Sure.
Because that's how you and I met.
Yes, yes. By the luck of
And
the draw, you were placed in my room at the booth.
yeah, and I loved it. And knowing, having worked at that booth for a little bit and knowing the other cohorts, I can definitely tell you aspects of my life would not have been on course if I'd have gone into a different room. So,
Okay.
without going into details of my
Without
personal
going
life
into
on this
detail.
podcast,
Right.
um,
No, we'll
I
just talk about my personal life. Woohoo!
no. Well, what I'm going to talk
Ah.
about is like,
No, it's totally fine. It's just you're asking deep questions and I'm giving deep, long, probably people are going to go get a cup of coffee kind of answers.
and I hope they do, because that means they come back and sit. So, look, here's my deep long answer. Like, I met you when I was married,
Hmm.
and you have seen my evolution and been a mentor through that entire process, even after it ended. Um, and knowing some of the other people and the way that they've done readings, your style of tarot card reading and your style of even just getting 15 minutes in a room with you, and I say this in a positive and healthy way, feels like you spend an hour and a half with a really good therapist, because you read the cards and you ask honest questions, and they're very blunt and direct questions, which I absolutely love. Um, because most people are caught on their back foot and surprised, and I'm like, oh, this is where we lean in, because I'm fucking crazy. So,
Welcome to
you
the
know,
club. We have
I love
cookies.
it. I love it. It's the dark side. So, who or what inspired you to get into that kind of reading?
Ah, okay. Wow. So this is another goes back to everything goes back to before I was 7 years old. Um, Back in the Soviet Union. First of all, where I'm from in Moldova, that kind of what they call divination, which call it what you will, interpretation of symbols, I will say, is just something you do. It's not hallowed ground. It's not being a psychic. None of that. I certainly don't do any of that. That's not at all what I do. And in Moldova, it's just what you did. You would throw some stones and see what you could see from throwing those stones, that kind of thing. And my great grandmother Golda, who my younger sister Golda is named after, would I when I would be at their house, she would. I remember very clearly she would be frying up sunflower seeds in the shell, and she would talk to me about different things different ways to learn things, to know things. She would talk to me about stones. She would talk to me about different things that you needed to do in order to remember things or to find lost things. And it was just what you did. It's sort of folk wisdom. And then she started talking to me about reading cards. Now, not tarot cards, because I'd never heard of those and we certainly didn't have them, but regular playing cards. And regular playing cards are sort of the progeny of tarot cards. They just removed the major arcana and several of the other cards, and that's what the regular modern day poker playing deck is. And so she would talk to me about what the cards meant. And I'm 4 or 5 years old at the time, and I'm kind of like la la la, I don't know what's going on, but I'm sort of soaking it up. And then fast forward to 15, I was 15 and I was in a bookstore and I saw a tarot deck and I went, huh, what is this? And I looked at it and went, oh, I remember this. Look, I remember Grandma Golda talking to me about this. And then fast forward a little bit later, and I bought my own deck and started playing with it. Just sort of started remembering what she'd been saying and thinking about what my own thoughts were about what the cards meant, because there were more of them. And then friends found out that I had a tarot deck and they started wanting me to read. So I've been reading over 35 years now, and from that point, all through college and into my 20s, I started reading professionally and then started reading at corporate jobs and at the Maryland Ren Fest and private clients and traveling in many ways, well, all over the USA, a couple of times out of the country to read for big jobs. And again, it's about following your intuition, storytelling, and interpreting symbols. And so Grandma Golda started it, but the inspiration for becoming a reader was really looking at a deck and studying myself in many ways. Like, what do I see? What do I interpret? What stories are there in these decks? And I just had my own deck published, which is really fun.
I was going
And
to ask about that.
yeah, it's so cool. And the really interesting thing about that for me is that, as I said, it's about telling stories, right? And I called the deck the Practical Tarot because this is very practical. It's very by the book, as it were, but not the book that is somebody else has written down what the meanings are. It's you figure it out. Figure out what you think it means. Follow your own inspiration. Follow your own intuition. What story do you see in each card? That's what it means. And so it's about finding inspiration from within yourself to tell the stories you see in the images and the symbols of every card in the deck. And that's how I read. I don't read by any prescribed, this is what it means. I read by looking at the symbols, looking at the images, and letting them weave the story for me. And that's what I say. And I've got to tell you, Mike, there have been times when I have said things that I go, this is just going to be a really big piece of crap. And they're going to just look at me like I have three heads. And I go, well, I'm just going to say it. And so I just say it. And they go, oh, how could you possibly know that? I can't believe you actually said that. There's no way. And I go, well, that's just the story I saw. You know, it's not, there's nothing else to it. So that's really what it is. You know, I don't have a way of figuring it out or saying it any better than that. But I'm going to give you a quick story. This is one of my favorite little bizarre little stories. I had a man who came to me for a reading and he said, I've lost something and I need you to help me find it. And it's a family heirloom ring and I think someone stole it. And I went, okay. So we were doing a reading about where this ring was. And I said, you know, the cards he got said that the ring was not stolen, it was lost. And I said, it is surrounded by, it's in the dark and it's surrounded by a lot of paper. And it's nearby. In fact, it's near you, but it's in the dark and it's surrounded by a lot of paper. And he's like, that's meaningless. And I said, I'm sorry, that's what I see. And there it is. And about 3 months later, I get this email from him and he goes, so I just wanted to tell you that I found the ring. It was, wait, this is the guy. I was like, what? Because he goes, I found the ring and I had packed up a bunch of books in a bunch of paper bags to take to the used bookstore and they were in my trunk. And when I went to finally deliver them to the used bookstore and we were taking the books out of the bags, there was the ring. It had been sitting in his trunk for months in among all of the paper of all of the books.
The books.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there you go. You know, so, you know, he's like, oh, you're an amazing psychic. And no, not at all. I just looked at the story the cards were telling me. And in the moment, it made no sense at all. But afterwards, we were both able to go in the dark, the trunk of his car, surrounded by paper, among the books and paper bags.
Paper bags. Yep.
There it was.
Yeah, you've done something similar to for me on numerous occasions. You know, like maybe you want to take in consideration about how this relationship is impacting you, and like you know, all of those other fun things that come from knowing you and you know, having readings from you and worked with you, and like all of these other pieces. It is absolutely inspiring and a little intimidating how absolutely on point you can be. And sometimes, like you said, it is very much one of those things where it's the code doesn't make sense until you actually uh, figure it out. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I think the best quote that I could think of is, I don't know if you've seen the new Bill and Ted movie, Face the Music,
Not yet.
but the way that they get around that, they acknowledge that George Carlin had passed,
Mm.
um, and the way Bill and Ted have to figure out things is they give him Rufus a stopwatch, and on the inside it says sometimes the story doesn't make sense until the end.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what it is. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you'll say something in a reading and it'll be like, all right, that's absolute horse crap. That was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 years later you're like, no, she was right. God damn it, she was right.
I
um
it's bizarre. I had a man who came in for a reading and he's like, "Well, my tell me about me." It was a palm reading, not a tarot reading, and I said, "Well, you're a musician, you're a professional musician, and uh I'm going to tell you you're going to have two daughters very quickly, one right after the other." And he's like, "Well, I am a professional." He's a musician with the National Symphony Orchestra. "I am a professional musician, but there are no kids in the future." And I'm like, there are going to be kids in the future. And 8 months later, I get this email from him, and he says, "Hi, you probably don't remember me. I'm the musician from the NSO. And I haven't wanted to email you up until now because we didn't want to jinx it. But that night, after your palm reading that you said I was going to have two daughters in rapid succession, I came home and I said to my wife, hey, she said, we're going to have two daughters in rapid succession." And she's like, "We're not even trying." And he goes, "I know." And she said, "You know what? Let's just for fun, let's go get a pregnancy test." And he said, and she was pregnant. Our
wow.
baby daughter is due in July. And he's like, "I'll let you know for sure if it's a girl, but I bet you do still think it's a girl." And I went, "Yeah, great, congratulations." And a year and a half later, I get an email that says, all it has is a picture of two little girls, and all the words that say are, "You were right." That's
Yeah. Yeah.
it. Like,
Look,
that's amazing.
I worked as a hawker at your booth, and I met many people who are like, Izolda told me I was going to have a kid. I'm here to introduce her to the kid. And I'm like, all right. All right. So we talked about your we talked about your writing. We've talked about you reading, your music. We've talked about tarot. Um, one of the things, and I started by saying this, one of the things that fascinates me about you is your unbridled creativity. So who inspired that creativity? And it can be multiple people. We can have a long conversation
Wow.
about multiple things, but you know, um, for me, it's like Jim Henson and all of those people growing, like Disney and all of those people growing up that uh, the way that you described me, which got the reason I was kind of dumbstruck, is exactly how I think of Disney and Henson and these guys that just go out and create and inspire. So I would like to know, Izolda Trakhtenberg, who did that for you?
Hmm. It Some of the people I've already mentioned.
Hmm.
Uh, some of this is giving yourself permission to create. So some of it, I guess, is inspiration from different factors. George Lucas was a huge inspiration. Steven Spielberg was a huge inspiration. I don't like the fact that I'm just talking about men right now. I wish that there were more women in that room. Um, yeah, seeing Star Wars changed everything. Seeing those possibilities changed everything for me. I used to go every Saturday, and don't tell anybody. I used to go pay for one movie and then stay for two more and just watch Star Wars every Saturday afternoon. That I would grab my little sister and we'd walk over to the Americana Theater, and that's what we did. And I've seen Star Wars well over 100 times. A New Hope well over 100 times. So seeing that kind of storytelling inspired me. Seeing I got to meet one of my hero writers, Judy Bloom, in Key West, because she lives there and she has a bookstore there. She inspired me As a writer, she was one of the inspirations for me falling in love with story. That notion of storytelling as a medium, of being inspired to tell something in a way that got people leaning in and wanting to know more. She's wonderful at that. Other writers, let's see. I know probably most people would go, "Oh, Tolkien did. He didn't inspire me." I actually, again, too few powerful women in his books. Um, Maxine Hong Kingston was an inspiration to me. Zora Neale Hurston, another inspiration. Jane Goodall inspires me every day in creativity. And let's see, who else? I'm trying to think of if I could, if I could really figure out for myself who are the people who. It's not that, see, that's the thing, Mike. I have to say, it's not that I go, "Oh, I want to be like them." It's more like if they can do it, I can do it.
Absolutely.
So when I think about it, in the moment, I'm a little dumbstruck, a little speechless, because there are many, and at the moment, let me think. Oh, Julia Cameron is another one. Reading The Artist's Way changed so much for me because, again, it's about giving yourself permission and setting boundaries and enforcing your boundaries, which is really good. Starhawk, who is a pagan writer who wrote The Fifth Sacred Thing, and The Spiral Dance, which is a seminal book in the lives of many neo-pagans. But for me, it's about the fiction book she wrote called The Fifth Sacred Thing. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now to see who else has made me go, yes, Zilpha Keatley Snyder, definitely. Lois Duncan, definitely. Those are people who just inspired in me a love of, again, storytelling. The members of the Manhattan Transfer, certainly. Chip Davis of Mannheim Steamroller, certainly. Those are musicians. Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Duke Ellington, so many of the great jazz musicians. Really, from Billie Holiday to Ella Fitzgerald to Coco Taylor to Diane Reeves to you name it, they've inspired me. Meryl Streep is a huge inspiration. When I used to want to be an actress, and I did for a long time, she was my favorite actress. Robert De Niro was, of his generation, such an amazing actor, and also inspired me. But really, Meryl Streep, honestly, is one of those. She disappears into her characters in such a way that she's focused on the story, and I love that. So the great storytellers, either the ones creating the stories or the ones expressing them, like the actors and the movie makers and the playwrights and people like that, whoever is involved in telling the story, I'm going to find some inspiration from them, for sure.
Well, that is a long list of people that I now have to go start looking up. So while you are on my podcast about unintentional mentors, and we've talked about hundreds of yours, which I'm very excited by, because I get to go, as I go back and edit this, I'll be like, oh, let me check out these names that I don't recognize. You have your own podcast, The Innovative Mindset. So you have had the opportunity to talk to some amazing people. What have you gleaned from those? I believe you are, if not close to 200 conversations.
Well, I'm about to celebrate 400 episodes.
400 episodes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm at episode 388 right now.
I knew that. I wanted to hear you say 400.
I know, right? But not all of them are interviews. That's true. For a long time, the podcast itself was called Tell Your Story Better. And because that storytelling is my favorite thing. I love the notion of sitting around a bonfire and telling stories to a rapt audience. And so that's what the podcast was about, was how to get those stories out, how to tell them better. I wrote a book kind of on storytelling, Speak From Within. And that was, for a long time, that podcast was about giving information on how to do that, how to be a better storyteller, how to get that excitement going, and how to speak it in such a way that people really wanted to know more. And then I changed the name and sort of rebranded it to the creative mindset, because that notion of creativity excites me so much, that I've been talking a lot about that moment of inspiration between when the idea hits and the instant you verbalize it. There's a universe that exists there, and that universe is all about how are you going to respond to that inspiration? Are you going to follow it and go, yeah? Or are you going to go, oh, that'll never work? And that instant, I'm writing a book on that right now, that all that goes into following that moment of inspiration. And so then I reconfigured the podcast yet again and changed it to the innovative mindset when I decided to start talking to the peak performer creatives and change makers in the social impact, environmental, animal rights space. And every single person who's been on the show has been incredibly inspiring to me. My goodness, I've had world-class magicians, world-class Grammy Award-winning musicians. So Captain Paul Watson, who is the co-founder of Greenpeace and the founder of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. They do direct action against poachers, which is amazing to me. I'm about to have a guest on the show who is, she's the co-founder of a reserve in South Africa where they are essentially, keeping the poachers at bay and saving wildlife, which is so close to my heart. So anybody Wendy Hapgood is her name. She's amazing. And so the people who make the choice to change the world through that creative thinking and that innovative thinking are the ones that make me want to do a jig. They are the ones who, like Captain Paul Watson, like Vikas Garg, he is the founder and CEO of A Billion, and it's an app. It's a food review app or a product review app, all vegan. And it's all about them trying to get 1 billion people to be committed to a plant-based lifestyle by 2030. That's the goal of the company. To me, that's catnip, right? So those are the kinds of people that I am talking to. But I've also had Andrew Lippa, he's Grammy Award winning, Tony nominated for The Addams Family and many other things. And I had Al Petaway, who's another Grammy Award-winning guitarist, musician. And I've also had Tom Peters, who is a leadership guru, who's talking about what he calls extreme humanism, which is think about the people that you're working with and that you're leading, and your role as a leader is not to get them to do what you need. Your role as a leader is to support them into doing what they do so that they thrive. And in many ways, that's a radical notion. And in many ways, he's been talking about it, as he says, he's been stumping on that proverbial plank for the last 40 years, because he wrote, In Search of Excellence, which is by many considered to be the best and most successful leadership book of all time, leadership in business. And he was on the show, and this is something that you inspired in me too, Mike.
Thank you. I don't know how, but go ahead.
Well, so one of the things that you did very early on, when social media was first starting, you gave me Chris Brogan's book and you gave me Gary Vaynerchuk's book, right? So I think it was Social Media 101 and Crush It.
Yep.
And you said, and I said, what is all this? And you were like, trust me, you're going to want to know about this. And one of the things that you did that I watched you do is you were out there on Twitter and you were like, let me just talk to them. I'm just going to comment and I'm going to talk and I'm going to engage in conversation and we're going to become friends. And this is how you do it. And I went, huh. So with Tom, he was posting, tweeting, and I'm not much on Twitter, but I was on there and I responded and he said something and we started talking about leadership. And I just went, okay, I'm going to just be really brazen. And I said, I would love to have you on my podcast to talk about this. And he said, I would love to. Here's my booker, essentially. Contact her and I'll be on your show. And he's been on my show twice now, right?
That's awesome.
So because I went, you know what? Let me take a I forget what the English phrase is. A page from your book, I think it is.
Yeah,
I'm going to take a page from Mike's book. And that's what I did. And sure enough, and we're writing a paper together, which is so exciting to
Oh,
me.
that's
Tom,
awesome.
yeah. Well, as he said it on the show, so I can say it here. He's like, "Well, you're going to write it, and I'm just going to add some commentary. I hope that's okay." And I'm like, "Oh, that's fine." so, you never know when inspiration strikes. If you follow it, who and how and what you're going to get in with, and it's amazing.
That is the best place to dovetail into um, thanking you for the show, because you have just dumped an amazing wealth of inspirational knowledge, and you told a story that made me uncomfortable because it's the first time I've ever heard it.
Oh
Um,
no, which story was that?
uh, that I inspired you with social media, and then that's the tool that you got, to now one of the projects that you're working on.
Oh, absolutely. And you should take full credit for that, because
Oh,
it was seriously, it was watching you do it that inspired me to go and do the things that I've done with social media. And I've got, I've learned, I've studied social media and other people and with other people and all that other stuff, but that notion of be real,
hmm
talk to them is so important. And so that's one of the ways I do my podcast, actually, is as I tell people, I'm like, because some of the people come on and aren't used to being on a show or whatever, and I say, imagine we're sitting in a cafe having a cup of coffee. That's all
Yep.
that's happening. And that's all it is. That's all we're trying to do is have a cup of coffee. I have some questions I want to ask, and we're going to have a good time. And relaxing them helps everything flow more smoothly. And then, as one of my reviewers said for the show, these conversations go really deep, and we do, because it's all about, again, authentic is another one of those overused words. I want a good synonym for it, but that notion of being
Yeah.
who you are is really, it's key and it's important, and you do that very well.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's very interesting because the way that you had discussed, Andrew and your luminaries from high school stage days, like I've gotten to know Chris Brogan and Gary Vaynerchuk before they were Chris Brogan and Gary Vaynerchuk. Like, um, I had been blogging for Network Solutions, and they're like, and Gary Vaynerchuk was still just the wine library guy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I was like, let me go to New Jersey and interview him and like, I have a feeling this is going to be big. And
Mm-hmm.
they're like, you could do it, but you're going to pay for it yourself. And I was like, fine. So I got to go up and I got to drive into North New Jersey and go into the wine library and go into the room that became the wine library set before it was the wine library set, and just sit
Cool.
down and interview Gary. Um, and then like the same thing with Chris, like I Chris Brogan, I've seen Chris Brogan at events, at social media stuff, and then just had conversations with him. And one of the things that it's fascinating and put me on like, you have more than any of the previous 4 interview guests that I have put me on my back foot of having to think of things to say, because I don't think of like, this has been more of like, let's talk about Mike a little bit than usual, because I don't think about myself these ways, and you're attributing aspects of my inspiration to you the same way that these guys inspired me, and that's why I gave you their books. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. So, okay, let me ask you a question then.
You
You've
can.
interviewed a lot of people.
Sure.
Who's your favorite interview? Who's the person who's inspired you the most when you've been interviewing them?
So far, you are interview number 5.
That's
You are
not what I
guest number
mean.
5.
No, no, no.
But
In
you mean
previous
outside of this podcast.
Outside of this yeah, I know this podcast is new, and that's really cool, and I'm so glad you're doing it, because I'm sure it's going to be incredibly valuable to many people. But
Thank
you've
you.
talked to a lot of people. You're a mensch, Mike. You're a mensch.
Oh
So
God.
who who has been your favorite interview?
um, that's a hard one. So, I for anybody that has seen Brown Coats Redemption, there's a series of interviews that were done with the cast and crew. Um, I think, and I've gotten to talk to social. It's weird now that I've never had this question posed to me. Fuck, Izolda. I'm glad that this isn't explicit content on the thing.
Oh, I didn't know
God.
that. I would have cussed a lot more.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I should have warned you that I mark that this is not for children whenever it goes up on YouTube. Um,
Absolutely.
so let's see. Who is my favorite? Um, you know what? And this is going to be uh, it's not going to be controversial. I had the opportunity, and I didn't. This isn't a formal interview, but this is somebody I had the pleasure of talking to. So there's the adage of never meet your heroes because they're
Mm.
going to let you down. And as I'm saying this, you're probably thinking I'm going to say Joss Whedon, and that's not who I'm going to talk about. Um, I had the opportunity to go on a trip to South Africa with Joe Rohde, who is the Disney Imagineer who created Animal Kingdom, who is
Wow.
known, he helped create the Avatar land, Pandora. He is often known for his like one big dangling earring of collage of earrings. And I got to spend 2 weeks. Jen and I got to spend 2 weeks with him and his wife, and then Dr. Mark Penning, who's the vice president of Animal Affairs. I think I'm butchering his title at Disney, who I
Hmm.
absolutely want to introduce you for your podcast because you two would be a delightful thing to have listen with his South African accent and your love of conservation.
Yay.
Um, so I was, again, you very rarely starstruck, very rarely dumbfounded and short for words. Um, over the course of several days, got to talk to Joe Rohde and just listen to this man's wealth of knowledge and watch how humble he was about it. And I literally have one of my favorite pictures, and it was a Facebook profile picture, is that Jen took it. It is from behind. It's Joe Rohde sketching and me standing next to him. And we literally talked for 15 minutes because one of the things that I had told him I was having trouble with was like, I don't do speed drawing. Like, I can't just look at something, draw it really quickly, because in my mind, it needs to look like the finished product before I walk away.
Mm.
And he literally gave me a master's art class in 15 minutes. And he's like, what I'll do is I'll roughly sketch it. And then I might put some color touches. And then I won't touch it until I'll get in the car like an hour later. And if I'm on a bus ride like we are now or somewhere else, he's like, and I'll finish the drawing from my memory. But I've put enough down on paper that I've taken a photograph in my mind that I can finish it at a later time.
Hmm.
And the permission, the unintentional permission he gave me to not have to finish a creative project the moment it starts was probably the most life-changing creative, because I watched him do it in real
Mm-hmm.
time. 15 minutes, he sketched the mountain, did like little highlights, put everything in like little thumbnail form. Um, and then on the bus, as we were driving for 20 minutes, just started fleshing it out. He'd be like, come here, take a look. And here's how I'm shading it. And at the end of the day, he showed off this like masterpiece of a picture. Um, so I tell you that part to tell you the thing that happened at the very end of the trip, which is, I did the same thing. I sketched a picture of a lion head because we saw the lion. And then everybody else was doing like beads and stuff like that. And they had an archery thing. And I was like, all right, I'm done. And I just went in the couch and I finished drawing the picture. And Joe happened to be walking by as I was showing Jen. And he leans over the couch and he goes, that you could walk into any airport right now and sell. And I guarantee you it's going to make at least $200. And I was just like, thank you, Joe Rohde. Um, and I will never sell that picture. But yeah, I mean, I have interviewed a lot of people. I've talked to, you know, people that one of the future guests on the show, Tamara Johnson, who has become a dear friend of mine and a friend of yours. Uh, she was the audio producer for Max Headroom in the 80s, like a show that I loved. And she's responsible for Max Headroom's voice modulations and talking like we're friends. And I think people fail to kind of your point of like reaching out on social media, it is just a human being on the other side of the conversation. And those mentors, whether they are intentional or unintentional, are just normal people. And I think once you break down the fear of talking to them without the fear of like, you could appreciate the work that they've done, because I've literally just spent at least half an hour um, telling you how much I appreciate you in the form of questions. Um, but you can have conversations with these people and find similarities to either become future collaborators, friends, or whatever, or they could continue to mentor you in a way that you have the opportunity to tell them. So, yay, that was my long, this is my favorite interview story.
I love it. I love it. That's so cool. And no, it is because here's the thing. What I got out of that was that you took a chance on learning and on trusting yourself, and you were, again, authentic. I hate that word. I mean, the word itself is great. The word itself is great, but it's so overused.
Yeah, it is.
But you were vulnerable and you were real with this man who obviously is someone who inspires you. And he was gracious and was there for you. And both of those things had to occur. And I think there's a symbiosis that happens in that way that is really important. And there's one thing that I'm in listening to that I was thinking, it is that you have to be okay with hearing no.
Yeah.
You have to get okay with hearing no. I mean, Tamara, I love Tamara. You know I love Tamara. But if she were a different person, or she were too busy, or whatever, and you hadn't become friends, then it would be something different. And
Absolutely.
if she had said no, you'd have to be okay with that. You know, you'd have to go, you know what? That's cool. She'll be a mentor from afar, you know?
Absolutely.
And there's something about that is really hard for people. And it's hard for me too. There are times when I'm really invested in the yes, and the no shows up and I'm like, oh, but on the whole, you pick yourself up and you keep on going, because if not this door, another door, right? So that's an important part of this, is if you want to make your mentors, like you said, be careful of meeting your heroes, because they're going to let you down. But also, sometimes you meet your heroes and they just don't have time for you. Not that they're letting you down or not letting you down. They're living their own lives, whatever those lives are, whatever that work is. So being okay with being inspired by them at a distance is really good too. I got to meet Judy Bloom, but it's not like she and I were writing. I had this fantasy. I had a fantasy about Judy Bloom, clean, very clean, but that I was sitting at a cafe in Key West where she lives, and I go as often as I can, and I was writing, and I looked over to my right, over my soy latte, and there's Judy Bloom sitting at a table writing. And it's ridiculous because she's got this amazing, beautiful writing space at her home. So I don't think she needs to leave to go to a cafe to write, but the fantasy was so fleshed out. And when I met her, I told her that, and she giggled at me and she goes, "Oh, yeah, I do like soy lattes, but I tend to make them at home." And I was like, okay, it's not like I expected, you know, even though I desperately wanted to be able to produce a soy latte for her out of thin air at that moment. But, you know, it's really funny. There are times when you can tell your mentor how they impacted you, and you can make an impact with them. And Judy Bloom is an interesting story about that. When I met her, I got to tell her that she's partially responsible for me learning to read English. As you might remember, I hated to read.
Yep.
But I had to read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And I think that was in third grade. And I just
That's a heavy book for a third grader, but I love that you were reading it.
Well, I had to. And because Mrs. Saperstein, my third grade English teacher, put the book in my hands. Or she was actually my third grade teacher. I don't think we were divided into different classes yet. But anyway, so sounding out the words in Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret helped me learn how to read English, because there were no ESL classes when I first came. So they threw me into first grade, and went, here you go, enjoy. And I didn't speak any English except for hello, goodbye, and where's the bathroom. And then, and I was really good in math. So they went, oh, she's good in math. So we're going to have her skip second grade. So I went from first grade to third grade.
Ugh.
And yeah, and still didn't really read and there was nobody really who was teaching me. And so Mrs. Saperstein went, here, read this. And so reading Are You There, God to See Margaret, and otherwise known as Sheila the Great, and Blubber, and so many other Judy Bloom books, that's what helped me learn how to actually sound out and read English words. So I got to tell her.
And what was her
When we
reaction?
met. She giggled and little tears sprang in her eyes. Oh, thank you so much for telling me. And I'm like, I'm gonna cry too. So it was a love fest for about 3 minutes. It was great.
Yeah, and to your point of, being okay when your mentor is saying, or anybody says no, like, um, I am okay with the no, and what tends to put the no person on their back foot is the why. Like, I don't have like, Brown Coat's Redemption would have never been made if I accepted the first no,
Mm.
because the first no was, we don't want to authorize a fan film because that looks like we're endorsing it. And I was like, okay, great. How do we get around that? Like, what do you need? And then it was literally like, well, if you're willing to talk to this department and this department and this department, and literally 30 days of phone calls, and then writing down every single person I spoke to and be like, well, person A told me that if I talked to person B and got their permission, and then I talked to person C, that person A would give me and just kind of being willing to, like, sometimes no means no. And let's be very clear. And a lot of times in life, no absolutely means no. It means full
For
stop.
sure.
But there are also times where no just means not right now. Or no just means it's not the appropriate moment. And yeah, there are times where you get to meet your mentors and you get to profess your undying love and affection, not afflection, for
I have an
their
affliction for Judy Bloom. That's very interesting.
for the work that they did. And sometimes that's all it really needs to be, and those things are just as impactful as they are getting to spend 15 minutes with your idol, or getting to have a conversation with them, or welcoming them onto your podcast, or whatever it turns out to be. And I think each of those moments are just as special and valuable, regardless of the amount of time that they take.
Oh, absolutely. And I agree with you completely. That notion that we can get inspiration over the long haul for somebody's body of work versus something they said or something someone said or did. You can be inspired by looking, I get inspired by watching those videos of people who, there's that one video that never fails to make me cry about the guy who has like a outdoor restaurant, and there's a kid who's trying to steal something, and the guy's
Oh yeah.
daughter's like, yeah, and he gives him the soup, and then years later he comes back as the doctor and pays for their entire medical bill. That kind of stuff just and so I do cry at AT&T commercials. I absolutely do.
Look, I cried
And
at a Disneyland Paris commercial, where this little duckling finds a Donald Duck comic book, and starts emulating him, and then using it as a cover for when it's raining, and kind of goes through the thing of like Donald Duck's angry pose, or just how he walks. And then the family of ducks have to fly away, and the comic book gets dropped and it falls to the ground, and I'm crying about a duck who just lost a comic book. And then he's waddling in the grass, like lamenting the loss of this comic book. And then you see this big shadow, and who is it but like Donald Duck in Disneyland Paris. And then the little duckling just runs up and hugs his foot. And you put that commercial on, and I'm a fucking blubbering idiot for 20 minutes. So yeah, I'm right there with you on commercials make you cry.
yeah, and they're meant to, but those kinds of stories that you and he met his hero. I mean, think
Yeah.
about that. He met his unintentional mentor, and that moment of recognition for that that's going to make everybody cry. I don't know. There would not be a dry eye in the house, that we would all be blubbering messes because that emotion is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, it's one of the reasons I'm really glad you started this podcast because
Oh,
no, seriously, the emotion behind being inspired, allowing yourself to try, being okay with the no, but even just letting your mentors know that they have mentored you, there's a cycle there that's really beautiful, poignant, profound, and potentially life-changing. And I think that's really important.
I got nothing.
And scene.
And scene. All right. My sister from another mister, one of my favorite people on the planet of the earth, regardless of how long we do not speak.
Well, we speak as often as we can, little brother. That's the way it is.
I know. If and how people want to find your podcast or you, where can they do those things?
One of the best places, and thank you for asking that. That's very sweet.
You're welcome.
One of the very best places to find me, I'm all over Instagram, at Izolda T, and I'm pretty much at Izolda T everywhere. If you look, except Facebook, where I'm Izolda Trakhtenberg, because an Eastern European porn star got to Izolda T before I did.
Oh,
Yeah. There are a lot of, I used to have Izolda as sort of a unique name, but now there are a lot of Eastern European porn stars named Izolda, spelled the way I spell my name. So I get a lot of Google alerts for things I never want to see. Anyway, so at Izolda T on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on TikTok, on whatever, many of them, Clubhouse, all of that stuff. And at curiously enough, IzoldaT.com is my website if you want to see some of the work that I'm doing with companies to help them create from and innovate from a compassionate and collaborative place. That's kind of the work that I do outside of the podcast. The podcast is at Innovative Mindset Podcast on Instagram or podcast.izoldat.com. And those are the best places to find all of that stuff.
awesome. Well, I will make sure to put all of that in the show notes. But Izolda, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome back, mentors. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Izolda. Great dear friend of mine. Love her to death. Very, very honored that we got to have the conversation that we have. She caught me flat-footed. You heard it. Didn't edit it out. Thought it was valuable to you. I really, really hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope you found something in there that was meaningful or inspiring to you. I really know that this probably conversation could have gone on for hours. Like I could talk to her and have talked to her for a full weekend. But I got to hear some things that I've never heard before. She got to get me to tell a story, which not many people ask of. And I hope you found some value in this conversation. As always, thank you for your time. I appreciate you taking the time to join me, and I look forward to introducing you next week to your next Unintentional Mentor.